Alright guys, such coming again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. The Cloud9 roster was in action for the first time last night. Lots of reaction to their result against G2. Not the one they would have wanted, but far from as bad as many thought that it might be. Zuma among others with some reaction. Certainly Paulex as well, with a few words for HyDra we'll get into. But also the OpTic guys, certainly Coach JP, discussing the spawns right now in Overload. TJ agrees things need to change ASAP because the game mode has arguably been ruined over these last couple of weeks. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We're going to dive straight into that series of last night, the final one of the day. Look, G2, top 4 at the major. They've been looking pretty good. They nearly beat OpTic the other day. That was a reverse sweep that OpTic had to put off to get the victory. Even then, it came down to a Game 5, Round 11. G2 were probably always going to win this series. And yes, when you play a team like this, I imagine that, Game 1, they weren't taken as things as seriously as they might have been. But nonetheless, fair play to Nejra and Courage and Okis, by the way, already having cameras. I don't know what's going on with TJ, but it's been plenty of weeks now. There's still nothing going on over there. But effectively, these guys, on paper, they would be like a top 16 challengers team based on their pro points. But they put the work in over the last few days. Yeah, they're not getting paid an awful lot by Cloud9, as we know, which is why many rejected the opportunity to take this team up. And look, at the end of the day, they got 3-0'd. But there was some promise in here for the players, and I really don't think we should be in a spot where you've got a CDL caliber franchise team paying the amount of money that these guys are. If it was an open system, they would be getting outspent by challengers teams and they'd be quickly out of the league. But you can see the logic in at least taking the offer, because more than likely, at least one of these guys at some point is going to have played well enough in this stint to at least get another look in. Which player that is going to be, I guess we shall see. But hopefully as a team, they also try and succeed as a team, right? Because if they're playing for their Lion Man cards, then the team is going to get slammed, and maybe one or two of these guys look pretty good as a consequence. But, I don't know, it's interesting. They're a team that's always going to be overlooked and, I wouldn't say underrated, but teams will play them not expecting much. And if they can lock in and commit and have the right mentality, maybe they can get an upset win here or there and set themselves up for success going forwards. Formal says, yeah, G2 are running it down, sure, but it's a respectable loss. It wasn't bad. HyDra was hiding that map. The amount of damage was abysmal, he says. That was about the Game 1. The Game 2 search, this wasn't great, to be honest. That there's been better maps of COD played by a team. I don't know what Okis is up to here. Zuma was having a good time watching along anyway. So, yeah, lots of Stallions players in the league now. Crump was even there for a brief period of time. So, lots of Stallions in the lobby, mostly on the Cloud9 side, former Stallions. This is Okis, who had like a sponge to, I don't know, maybe his headset broke or something. So, it's all going on the Cloud9 side of the stage. But I think many people were, reasonably impressed. I think people were expecting a 3 absolute slammage. I do wonder what their kind of quality of practice is going to look like. You've got pro teams who don't like to play against the amateur rosters, generally speaking, especially because Cloud9 on paper, as I say, they would not have been a top seed in challenges. So will they get quality practice? Depends, because Ravens, they are a team that went on a very impressive win streak online. But people aren't very happy with scrimming the Ravens right now. There was actually this tweet that Cremp and Nasty did. Because they're based in all different places, when you scrim them, it's tough because you've got boys like Exceed out in LA and the servers that they play on. Nasty says it's hell to scrim those guys. Crump says your packet bursting and gunfights take forever. It's the weirdest thing to play them. So given that, it's plausible that maybe Cloud9, they might not be that bad. I'm not sure they're playing together exactly. There's certainly not a team house situation going on. Cloud9 aren't going to pay for that. But it might be a better experience for pro players to actually scrim against them, in which case, hopefully for their sake, they do get some quality practice in the coming weeks. And to be fair, they were winning this game in the overload. They're up 2-1. They then conceded it was a tie game, and for the last couple of minutes, they were kind of holding on for dear life. It was inevitable that this was going to happen, that they would eventually lose. But Mumba runs down middle, shoots 2 guys in the... I mean, look at this. They both hit the wall bounce. I think Encourage gets shot in the back by Okis. Mumba kills that guy, and then, yeah, it's all over from there. It was a pretty bad way to lose the map, to be honest. It was 2-2, it was all to play for, and then, yeah, the comms obviously collapsed, and you're not usually going to see anything like this on a pro level typically. So, look, there were some rough edges, let's say, but I do think people walked away from this series saying, okay, there's a little bit of promise here. Ariane, the coach, says the improvements the boys have been made is massive through a very short stint. We're working hard to implement our core system and principles, which you can see show in moments. So, yeah, we'll see how the core system and principles get on. But we do have a 3-0 scoreline in the end. So, you know, the results do speak for themselves. Nejra, I think, was probably the most impressive this series. He has been a name that people weren't particularly familiar with, but when he got picked up, people were saying, yeah, this kid actually does have it, at least based on the rosters he was on. That was at Project Cabal team earlier on this season, I think. So encourage HyDra and Okis, of course, were the Stallions in a former lifetime. Kremp actually has more damage than EzrealReal, but he has a 0.8 and EzrealReal had a 1.3. So sometimes that's how it goes. The game 3 could very much have gone either way, but EzrealReal walks away as the MVP of the series. So can Cloud9 do anything going forwards? Formal did give some thoughts on that and say, look, I think they were better than expected. I don't think they're going to go 0-11. I think they'll win. Now, next week they play OpTic. Again, I know that some OpTic fans out there will be saying, well, it's just one of those series, you never know. OpTic last year, I think there were some questions, right? Last year's OpTic 0-18 run was horrific. A Cloud9 that bad? Because last year's Falcons also weren't far off that. And this Cloud9 team, okay, they've started off 0-3, but on this evidence, they're going to get some map wins. Can they get series wins? You know, the question is always, okay, who are they going to have to beat in that scenario? Formal says that Pred and Cell would absolutely feast on this type of team. Now, maybe PaulX and HyDra boys, so, you know, it is what it is, but there were a couple of tweets that were doing the rounds anyway because of PaulX's comment in the Twitch chat. This was one, and this was another one. So, yeah, PaulX, obviously not in the league right now. He was in the league not long ago. Of course, it was on G2 actually last year, where he was on that Rocket team before they dropped him for Kenny, famously. So, kind of similar setup, really. Anyway, PaulX has a few words for Hyde. The bottom line is, Cloud9 pretty much at the bottom of the standings. Well, they are the bottom of the standings overall. They've only got 10 points so far this season. They had a number of Game 5s. They actually have way more map wins than Surge have, but Surge is still above them because they at least got a couple of points in at the major tournament. This is how things look in Major 2 so far. So Toronto are bottom of anyone. They're 0-2, having not won a map yet. You do really have to wonder. We're going to discuss some Rostermania drama later on today, but yeah, I would be surprised if that team is the same next weekend. Certainly if it's the same for too much longer. Cloud9 have played G2. They still have to play everybody else on this list over the coming 5 more weeks of qualifier matches or whatever it is. Thieves are at the top at 6-1, OpTic are at 6-2, second up, then it's Gentlemate. So definitely some usual suspect at the top of the list. Top 6 is really where you need to be here because, well, if you guys are familiar, the bottom 2 teams don't even go to Birmingham. They don't even get to play on LAN. So Cloud9 are probably going to be in that category, unfortunately for them. If they can get to like 2 or 3 wins, they might have a chance, but I think it's going to be a tall order to say the least. And with a team like Cloud9, it was kind of the same with Falcons last year. We'll see how good Cloud9 actually are, but with Falcons last season, they occasionally won a search, or they occasionally won a overload or control, as it was, of course, last year. They occasionally won the game 3s. But the question for them was always, okay, well, at some point they're going to go the distance. They're going to go to 5. And when they do, now they've got to figure out how to close a series out. And that's a different challenge. We saw Cloud9, they got close to winning the overloads, and then they bottled it, right? So that, I think, is the issue for Cloud9, is first of all, they've got to get into positions where they could potentially win a series, and then they've got to go on and do it. That's a different challenge when the pressure is on. And then you've got to do it on LAN. So it's a big learning curve for sure. this is how the standings currently look. As I say, the bottom 2 don't even go to Birmingham. The next 4, so 7 through 10 seeds, they go, but they play a GSL style, some sort of play-in to even make it to the brackets. The 2 that lose that, they go home immediately as well. So you want to be top 6. That's what makes you safe, effectively. Cloud9's upcoming run, if you guys are interested, is as follows. So it's Falcons and OpTic next weekends. Then it's Gentlemates the weekend after with Heretics that weekend too. Then it's Surge Boston, Toronto Thieves, and then Ravens FaZe. So that's their run. It maybe gets easier in the middle. I mean, definitely the series against Surge. I mean, this kind of Miami, Surge, Boston, Toronto stint, that's where they probably need to get their wins. Maybe Falcons are vulnerable as well. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on today. However, one of the big dramas of yesterday was what's been happening in Overload. We've still had, I think, some entertaining Overload games. The Thieves one against Ravens was like a 6-4, pretty high scoring. We've seen some great overtimes recently on Den Overload as well. Falcons got involved in a couple. But there was some talk about the way the spawns work. Now, we're not seeing as much parking of the bus. Maybe we would see it more on LAN, I don't know. Falcons kind of invented it, but now they're getting a little bit better at scoring, so it's maybe not so necessary. It is still a relevant strategy, but we are seeing that they've changed the spawns. Now, my argument for the spawns before Major 1 and during Major 1 was, if you're going to change them, you should change them in park the bus scenarios to spawn the defenders a little bit further away. So if there is a wave and somebody's parking the bus, they will then spawn out, kind of like it's captured the flag, and they've got to make a decision whether they wrap back and defend their man, or whether they try and overextend, go for a pinch and maybe play for the reset or something. So there's a couple of options. I do think it's interesting though that they changed the spawns to try and make the game mode better, because there's some other things that they've contemplated as well to try and improve the mode. I don't mind Overload. I actually prefer it to Control, so I find it more interesting to watch. But I do admit that it's not perfect by any means, and the spawns are now causing problems. So a few years ago, especially Modern Warfare 19, the concept of squad spawns really got introduced, kind of by Infinity Ward, at least it felt that way. That game, if you spawned up somewhere, the spawn logic would not really so much consider where the enemies were, where your teammates are. It's more like, okay, that guy spawned up there, we're going to spawn his whole team on him. And maybe it simplifies the logic. It means that you're always running into multiple players at one time, which it's more difficult to read, right? Because ideally you want the spawn logic to be based on where your arrows are on the map and how much map control the other team has, and therefore you can predict things. The problem is if one guy gets a weird spawn in a certain instance, then you still might expect the other 3 guys to spawn up where they should, but instead they might spawn on him in an overload. This has created a few issues because the team just spawns right next to the gentleman who's just arrived, and it makes it, well, it changes the game to a degree. JP says, can we just nuke squad spawns from COD forever already? Let's not go back in that direction. TJ says, given the update, it's now just a miserable experience. So yes, talk from Tej on Surge, talk from JP on OpTic, that things have got to change on that front. Look, should they just revert it? Probably yes. I think there's a good argument for that. There's a couple of changes. You know, they moved the portal slightly, didn't they, on the Den? So there's a couple of things that maybe they are moving in the right direction. But overall, it doesn't really feel like that's been a good step in the right direction at all. And if JP's not very happy about it, presumably the OpTic guys are talking about it a fair bit as well, that they're not very happy with the changes. Just some other quick roundup on the updates, because Envoy says GG's Miami and Falcons. They start out the stage 2-0. aBeZy says similarly, of course, they won both of their series on LA Thieves. Part of me still thinks he's on FaZe, but that's no longer a thing. Against Ravens and Surge, obviously they got the job done in both. Not, again, it was the easiest first weekend they possibly could have had. In some respects, I guess Ravens Online, they should be feared, but maybe no longer. And I definitely think Thieves did play better in that second series. Nium was certainly a big part of that. So very much enjoyed your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.
What do I think about C9? I think they played a lot better than people expected. Renegade, thank you for the prime, bro. I don't think they're going to go 0-11. I really don't, guys. I really don't. I think they're gonna win at some point. Maybe not in the next week because they play OpTic and Falcons, but I feel like Pred would feast on a team like this. I feel like Cell would feast on a team like this.